It's Happy Times and Places, a podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, watch Doctor Who and try to only say nice things about it, cajoled by a friend who's chosen a story that they love and has picked their favourite things about it. I have to see if I can guess what those are.
My name is David Quantick. I'm a comedy writer, mostly. I write other things and I do broadcasting. The story I am nominating is Genesis of the Daleks.
Well, welcome everybody to part 3 of Genesis of the Daleks, getting the Happy Times and Places treatment courtesy of my guest David Quantick, who I have never met, but whose name I have seen burned into the credits of many a great television show. So it's with suitable deference and much gratitude that I thank him for choosing. Interesting, isn't it? How this was a story that was not chosen because, as I record this, I've got loads waiting to go, but I've rush-released Genesis, which is actually the latest one that anyone has recorded their thoughts to me for, and I've got 50 or so waiting at least. Some people have recorded their things a year ago. But David has a book out, I think, as this is released this week, November the 2nd, 2021, his big quiz book, which sounds like a lot of fun, and he wanted to plug it. So I was asking around for podcasts, and this isn't a pluggy podcast, but it is one where you say what you like about a Doctor Who story and then throw a plug in if you want to. So I've offered him that, and he's done it, which is very kind of him. So he's chosen so far the fact that he watched Genesis of the Daleks with his friend, and he's chosen Harry Sullivan, whereas I have chosen the film work in part 1 and Davros in part 2. It's an embarrassment of riches, this story. It's a genuine classic, albeit one, as I say, that hadn't been chosen. Emma Reeves nearly chose Genesis of the Daleks and then went for Time Lash instead. So it could have been a really, really early one. But she went for something slightly different. So I have paused between episodes 1 and 2. So maybe you're on episode selection, but I'm going to press play in 3, 2, 1. Now it's on silent, that's why you can't hear anything. There we go. So that's it. Did start when it was supposed to. So here we are, Genesis of the Daleks 3. So Sarah Jane has paused in midair. She's done the David Maloney freeze frame, which I love as a little thing that he does in a few of his Doctor Who's. Deadly Assassin 1, Planet of Evil, with the Doctor falling into the black puddle. But this is a great sequence, and we go back a little bit. So I think Richard Reeves gets a credit, doesn't he, for being colored leader on this, even though all he actually does is to do what he did last week. So unfortunately he gets to die twice, but there's some great stunt work. The lighting here is fabulous. Yeah, so I've already talked about this. So let's talk about the cassette. I think that cassette is so brilliantly put together, and bits like that you could hear on the cassette. It's amazing which bits of the story they kept and which they didn't, and which are so familiar to me. And there's a bit coming up which is dispensed with in one line, and the really horrific aspects of it are cut, although I do remember them being in the omnibus that I watched. Well, the Doctor Who and the Monsters omnibus, but we'll talk about that. So I guess that's supposed to be a platform that's jutting out, but I don't. Yes, you can see now that I'm looking for it, but I've seen people writing online going, well, it's just a cheat because she falls inside. She doesn't. She actually falls outside. But I think. That's not quite clear. I think that's a fair misunderstanding people make. But no, it's a little balcony. It's a little plank sticking out of the edge. For obviously rocket workers to sit and have their sandwiches on during a distronic toxaemia break. Distronic toxaemia. There's so many words in this that are so etched in my brain. But of course, I had to imagine all of this when listening to the cassette. I do go on about the cassette during this, isn't it? You and your cassette, Toby. Why don't you just get a room? Well, I mean, I did. I did get a room with the cassette. And in fact, I also, because my cassette was getting so sort of stretched and overplayed, is I copied it onto another tape, but because that tape was longer on each side than the commercial tape, I actually edited my own cliffhanger halfway through the second part, and actually edited the cliffhanger of this, which we will talk about later because it's different from the cliffhanger in the TV cliffhangers. But I edited my own cliffhangers. That's part of being a fan, isn't it? Creating your own versions, or just sort of wanting to be involved. I didn't need another copy, really. I was just sort of justifying to myself that I could mess about, and it's how you learn about how to make things. And I think we've all done that, whether it's people who can draw, who've made their own video covers, or my rudimentary editing was and I mean, I do that now with podcasts and with videos. I taught myself to use iMovie, doing in memoriam videos, and indeed the YouTube version of this, which is quite time consuming, which is why we're only on one camera, because I've decided to make life easier for myself. Now this is where so actually on the cassette, you just hear Hilary Minster here, General von Klinkerhoffen, and also Marat in Planet of the Daleks. So we have Thal continuity, but he was a nice Thal. And this is what's clever about this story, is that the Thals are nice in Doctor Who history, but at this point in the Dalek War, actually there are no goodies and baddies, and this sadistic guard helps the plot not a jot, but it just goes to show that actually in this war, both sides are doing pretty grim things, and let's not just mistake the fact that, the Khalids look like Nazis, but the Thals are sort of blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and they have the Aryan Terry Nation thing going on. So, that makes the morality a little less black and white, or black and blonde, shall we say. But in the cassette, you just had Hilary Minster going, "Come on back down here," and then it cut. And of course, that's all you need for the plot to, Sarah has been recaptured. But that little extra couple of minutes, it's Guy playing, what is he, Thal Soldier, Thal Guard, but he gets a bit of sadistic character work, so it's nice for the actor. It helps to texture the world. It's pretty far away from, what Doctor Who was doing a year before. You can't imagine somebody in the corridors of Peladon doing that. But just to remind you, it's Doctor Who. Here are the terrible giant clams. I mean, Tom Baker really tries to sell this. He's got disgust on his face. He does that sort of thing, but he's wielding a polystyrene rock and hitting a giant clam with it. Oh, and breaking off a polystyrene stalactite. I mean, this is, if you are doing let's edit Genesis of the Daleks to make it have a smoother running time, you definitely go, let's get rid of the giant clams. They used to so upset me, because this was I knew this was a fairly infallible Doctor Who story, and then you go, oh no, and I bet that's the bit when my brother walks in. I mean, they really try and sell it, and the idea that you get bruises when you're bitten by a clam and all that sort of thing. It's an attempt to keep it real, but you can't pull. Well, can you pull? I don't think you can pull stalactites or stalagmites. Tights you pull up, stalagmites off a ceiling, and certainly that rock would have cut your hands open and taken some effort. Although Tom Baker did put the effort in, but you could tell it was polystyrene. And this is great. This is the Genesis of the Daleks, and this is Tom Georgeson, Dixie Dean in Boys from the Black Stuff, an excellent actor who's not been brilliantly served by Doctor Who. I think he's rather uneasy as Carville here. He's a Scouser, isn't he? So you've got a Scouser. Is he a Scouser? I think Scouser doing. He's very Cockney and Between the Lines, which is an excellent murky police drama that he was co-starred with Neil Pearson and Siobhan Redmond in the 90s. It's had a little bit of a resurfacing on BBC Four in Line of Duty Fervour, and his second lead in that is Harry the Chain Smoking, but he's very Cockney in that. But so you've got a Geordie actor and a Scouser here having to wrangle RP because you're not allowed regional Khaleds. But he's an excellent actor, Tom Georgeson, and certainly had a golden period in the 80s and 90s. He's in A Fish Called Wanda as well. And he returns to Doctor Who as the police inspector in Logopolis. I love all this. And I think a lot of this sort of, Khaled politicking is certainly lost in the cassette. But you get this. You get the politics, which I like, and I sort of believe it. You suddenly with civilians, and the idea that in a believable society, the military can't just do things, and Khaleds aren't all the same. There are different factions, and the Doctor, in a 6-parter, can try diplomacy, and Baker is so good at giving this sort of import, and he's deadly serious, and yet still beguiling and watchable and strange. But he's playing this absolutely straight. Although he's in a 20-foot long scarf, and he looks like a bizarre wizard. But I think the costuming of the civilians is an attempt to make them look, sort of like civil servants, but from this particular place that they've created. And I mean, it doesn't really go anywhere. Well, it does, of course, because the civilian government interfere, and that makes Davros destroy his own people. Which, of course, is all stuff that wouldn't have happened had the Doctor not been there. But the Doctor has to be a plausible figure to be, to be seen by these people, and I think Tom Baker absolutely sells it. Max Faulkner behind the mask there as the guard, a great servant to Doctor Who, but a stuntman, so he's going to get punched or thrown over by somebody at some point. And it's a great look, isn't it, at this? Because we the Daleks we take for granted as, these merciless machine beasts, but this is an entirely plausible backstory for them, that actually they had to be created and then planned for, and some people would object to them or object to them as they are and want them to be tweaked slightly. I think it's all, it's all very clever how this story is built up, and so compellingly told through the character of Davros, with the brilliant sidekick of Peter Miles, and poor old Ronson's card is marked. That's a great shot. I think I've seen that's been used as a screen grab in Doctor Who magazine of Nyder and Davros together. But what I think, because our sort of cliched image of Davros as the sort of, there he is tapping his finger, of the sort of yelling megalomaniac. Well, Michael Wisher does that so well when he needs to be Dalek-y. But it's amazing when you see this, when you're not used to seeing this in 6 parts, as I'm not as used to seeing it in 6 parts as probably other iterations, is the time it gives him to patiently tap his fingers and to size up his opposition. And he's not unhinged and out of control. Even when he's yelling, it's a sort of clipped control yelling. So he's not, one of his weaknesses is not the fact that he gets carried away. He's cunning. Ivor Roberts here as Mogren. I think he was I think he was an announcer for HTV Wales or something like that. He's as well as being an actor. But it's amazing how much of this is in the in the cassette, because it's not actually that long. They boil it down very effectively. Lovely Guy Signer. He's one of the few Doctor Who Star Trek universe crossovers because he was Dominic. He spent some time in America. I think he's got American blood heritage, so he was. I think one of his parents might be American, so he's had a bit of a career in the States, and he's in Star Trek Enterprise as Dominic Keating's character's dad, I think. I'm not hugely knowledgeable on Star Trek, although I could name the regular cast of all of the series. But I'm not. It's not anything I'd ever claim to have special knowledge of. But I know Guy Siner's in it. And then our troubles really begin, says the Doctor, and grins away. I love that. It's false bravado to cover up from the real danger. That's what this Doctor does so well. And again, you sort of think of Nyder as sort of clipped and cold, but he always has a slightly sort of benign smile thing going on. They're both, I think, the way that we think of these characters, because they're so indelible, Davros and Nyder, actually undersells how brilliant and nuanced they are. I mean, I don't know a Doctor Who fan that doesn't like them, but I think they're one of those rare occasions where actually the reality of what they do is even better than what we think of them. Because I think you go in knowing that they're good. You go to watch Genesis and you go, well, I know that Peter Miles and Michael Wisher are good, but actually looking at them really closely, they're better than that. And the material they've got is good. They look good, and they bring so much more to it. Look how inscrutable Peter Miles is. And that mask, John Friedlander, that mask is so expressive and believable. I believe that is what Davros looks like. And this is great because Miles isn't even, that Nyder's not sure that he's trying to control it. Well, and he will. I can. The death warrant of the whole of the college. Oh, he's going to kill his own people. And this is a great bit because doesn't Nyder say you would go that far? And he says, "Do you doubt it?" Yeah. No. That is great. The fact that he gives it a moment, but he doesn't change his expression. He's holding. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant piece of acting. That it's a wonderful exchange. So they because they're both on the same side, and Nyder is a loyal servant. This sort of stuff could be really boring. Just two villainous people being villainous, but actually there's so much nuance to both characters. And actually, what I like is because you think Nyder has betrayed Davros a little bit later, it's not entirely out of the question that he might have done because of that sort of darting intelligence and instinct that Nyder has, where you sort of know, well, he's a guy who's weighing up where's the safer. Deep down, you sort of go, no, he surely would never betray Davros, but you also know that his survival instinct is such that, well, might he? I don't think he ever would. But I like the fact that it's open to question. And I think we take Peter Miles for granted because he was in Doctor Who so often. He's brilliant. As I say, he was a strange man, I think. He was a bit of an eccentric. I remember him just kept saying in the Invasion of the Dinosaurs commentary to Terence Dix, "Terence, don't you think that Grover is like Davros and Whittaker is like Nyder?" Terence Dix just sort of rather crumpling, going, well, whatever. And it's very neat. Is that I haven't. I have, and Davros is actually very plausible here with the Thals too. And again, there's quite a good. I know there's polo necks which are quite sort of 70s, but I think with the sort of removal of time, I think they look. The costume in is fairly consistent. It doesn't look 70s to me, in the way that I used to, my heart used to sink whenever anybody had flares on in a 70s Doctor Who story. And I think it's because I am the youngest of four, so I had flares as a hand-me-down, and was laughed at. My mother used to say, tell them they're not flares, tell them they're straight-legged, because they are actually, they're straight-legged, they're not flares. And it's like, yeah, I don't think you know how bullies work, Mum. Even if you're correct, they've decided that they're flares, and me rejoining with facts based on your understanding of the correct terminology for fashion I don't think is going to be the armour you think that it is. But this is great plot development, that Davros would be so ruthless that he would destroy his own people. But I'm afraid I feel there are politicians today who, to get what they want, would sell all that is precious up the Swanee just for a little bit of power, or that which can facilitate the machinations of their own friends, which saddens me, because one would hope that people went into politics and public service only for good reasons. Another interest, I'm interested that I'm not watching this with my partner, who is a wheelchair user, who would probably be quite big on the whole idea that, the disabled character, because he is disabled. I know it's slightly more than that, because there's a reason for him being half Dalek, half person, which therefore inevitably has sort of, he's a person using a wheelchair sort of connotations, even though it's not a wheelchair, it's a Dalek base. But because recently there's the new Bond film out that I haven't seen yet, where I think the villain has a disfigured face. And, I've seen a lot of talk on Twitter about, why is it that disfigurement or disability is so often equated with evil? And that is a trope. That is I used to love this. When I remember being a kid thinking that was the most brilliant thing ever, and just so Doctor Who, he would just brazenly go up to them and go, "Could you help me? I'm a spy." The chutzpah of that, and the fact that he whacks their heads together. Because actually, if you knock people out, you could cause some permanent damage. But being knocked out in programs like Doctor Who is just sort of is an everyday thing, and once you recover consciousness, you just go about your daily business and often give chase. Whereas actually, a clonk on the head that's hard enough to knock you out. I mean, you definitely need to go and see a doctor. This is a little bit of he puts his gun down to go and talk to two people he doesn't actually know. That's a bit way too casual. And also, if you get punched in the stomach, they needed to hit him on the head, because you don't get knocked unconscious by being punched in the stomach. But we know that these are the vagaries of violence in a children's tea time thing. And I'm only mocking it because it's there. I don't care. Come on, go on, off you go, Mutos. So the Doctor. So this cliffhanger coming up is not the cliffhanger that I was used to, because the cliffhanger of the cassette. Why don't you snog the cassette, Toby? I don't know where the other Mutos go either. I hope they get out alive. But again, this is nicely, sort of grim attention to detail. Not just leave it there, have them come and shoot straight away. Boom, boom, boom. But this, so the cliffhanger on the cassette is from next week, when the Doctor, when the dome has been blown up. And the Doctor says, and I sent Sarah and Harry in there. And then you hear the explosion again. Because this cliffhanger wouldn't have worked on audio. But I remember when I watched the Doctor Who and the Monsters, and this bit was the cliffhanger, being like, no, that's not the proper cliffhanger. And of course, it's just a random sort of Jeopardy moment. It's not the most memorable cliffhanger in the world. Where I sent Sarah and Harry in there it really is. This is just like the 25 minutes are up. We need something. We need that man to recover from the blow to the stomach that knocked him unconscious. So there we are, Doctor Who, Tom Baker. So interesting. It's a sort of there is stuff you could lose in there, but I and a lot of it is sort of machinations, isn't it? It's it's the developing sort of political situation and the little factions off against each other that I like, because it means, and especially as I think, because I was used to this in short form. You're going to say cassette again, Toby? Shut up. I think when I first saw this, I actually liked the breathing space that the story was given, because realizing that actually some of those scenes that weren't needed in that shorter version do actually really help to give the story some texture, and all of the characters are sort of believable, and that even though they've been imposed back into the story as I knew them, don't, I think, slow the story down particularly. Yeah, the cliffhanger's fairly disposable and the clams are an embarrassment, but other than that, all of that is still high-end Doctor Who, and even the scenes that are quite talky and dialogue heavy are done with conviction by good actors, all of whom I think have made those dialogue scenes really work. The councillor, the councillors have not agreed, then the councillors are fools. I buy all those, even though the wider world of politics is represented by one man in a polo neck jumper. I do believe that world. I do believe that the Doctor's trying to get the feelers out there. But what is my favourite bit of that episode? I'm going to nail my colours to the mast. And I need to come back to the disability thing as well, because I started talking about the James Bond film and the thing of disfigurement meaning bad, which is interesting. And I'm not condemning anything. I just think it's interesting to talk about. And I don't think there was malice in the hearts of Doctor Who makers in 1975. But I think it's interesting to look at now, and I certainly don't think it takes away from the brilliance of what Davros is. But he exists within a tradition that itself is worth us considering, especially now. Especially, I'll talk about disability later, because now listen, and I've only become aware of a lot of this stuff because I'm, happen to have shacked up with a disabled performer, so my sensibilities have been attuned to this. So I'm claiming no virtue on my part. It's only when we become aware of things that that's answered its own question. That answers itself in the setup. We only become aware of things when we're aware of them. My favourite thing. What's your favourite thing about Happy Times and Places episode 3 of Genesis of the Daleks, everyone? It's the bit where Toby shuts up. Okay. My favourite thing about episode 3, which I think says a lot about how the bits of Doctor Who that really appealed to me and when I was a kid, is the bit where Hilary Minster, General von Klinkerhoffen off of Allo Allo, Marat off of Planet of the Daleks, and now the Thal soldier who, for the sake of nothing else but to add a bit of the muscular to Genesis of the Daleks, kicks Sarah Jane, holds her, and dangles her down. It's horrible. It's not very Doctor Who-y. Doctor Who is often much more fantastical than that, but it's just a moment where that doesn't need to be there, but the art lies in the fact that it is there, and it's a particular sort of violent and sadistic art that somehow, in the containable world of Doctor Who, appeals to me, and I'm sorry about that. And so let's see what David Quantick, genius comedy writer, has chosen for his thing for episode 3.
For episode 3, I choose Davros. Oh, God. Davros is one of the great Doctor Who characters. He's an unusual Doctor Who character because He only exists in the context of another character, i.e. the Daleks. But he's kind of that thing of upping your game. As everyone knows about the sitcom Frasier, Frasier's brother is like Frasier, only more so. Niles is more niminy-piminy, more fastidious, more pedantic, more annoying than Frasier, and it works really well. And Davros is, in a sense, the Niles to the Daleks' Frasier. Take the Daleks, the most horrible creatures in the history of science fiction. They don't look like aliens, they don't look like robots. They're not, as has been said, bug-eyed monsters. How can we make it worse? Well, cut one in half and stick a wizened old man in with a load of weird gubbins all round his head and a voice which is actually nastier than a Dalek's voice. Davros is kind of worse because he looks a bit like us. He's partly human. And they gave him, I think, a great Hammer horror reveal in the start of the series. And it's interesting, Davros is your classic character who gets killed off at the end. Oops, didn't think that one through, did we, Terry Nation? And then keeps coming back year after year after year. He's met all of them. I don't think he met Jodie Whittaker. That was an omission. I love Davros.
Yeah, well, I actually get that point. This is one of the advantages of this game for me, is that if I have already chosen something and the person chooses it, I get the point. So I get a point for Davros, which means I'm glad I chose him early. But I had to, didn't I? I'm so enthused by Davros. And it's interesting because in that episode he was very quiet and calculating. I love that description of him as the Niles of Doctor Who. I also like the word nimbly-pimmily. But yeah, that it's very true, because if you think about sort of Day of the Daleks and Planet of the Daleks, which are great but unremarkable stories, the Daleks are sort of going through. You get the Supreme Dalek with the great torch on its head in Planet, but I think they've but you know, there's the master plan. Oh, we're talking to all the aliens in the galaxy. Power. Oh, they're sneaky. David Whittaker writes them so well. Evil. We've got the Emperor Dalek. When they decide to do, there's a sense of occasion about the Daleks coming back. Which is sometimes why I object in the new series where they have cameos in stories, because then the Daleks having their own story, so it's just like, well, they're always popping into it in a flashback or a dream sequence or whatever, and you go, oh, but that's for another time. But Davros, yeah, he ups the stakes, but I also think and because the Daleks are brilliant, I mean, they're fantastic, but to then give them to have a slightly human-y Dalek, to then do all the things that the Daleks do, but have no mercy, speak in a shouty staccato way when necessary, but then to add to that a bit of cunning, a bit of guile, a bit of duplicity, a bit of vulnerability even, and you suddenly go, oh, that's actually made. It's sort of like the Dalek and human factor combined from Evil, where that's so effective. But they've actually embodied it in one person. I think Davros is brilliant. I think Michael Wisher is so good. I think that mask is fantastic. Yes, David, I agree that Davros is brilliant, and I chose him an episode ago, so put that in your pipe and smoke it. Along with some smoked salmon and scrambled eggs. No, it's tossed salad and scrambled eggs, isn't it? I could never quite work out what it was that Frasier was singing. So that would have been a great way to end if he'd actually said smoked salmon, but it's tossed salad and scrambled eggs. Boom, boom, boom. I don't know. It's been a long time since I've seen Frasier. That could have been a really neat package tied up and an exit, and I've fouled it up. I got delusions of grandeur and ended up with egg on my face. How very like Frasier or Niles. You decide. Take care.
And yeah, it says here, shamelessly plug anything you have coming up or your online presence. Well, I'm on Twitter, and on Twitter I'll be talking about my forthcoming quiz book, Quantick's Quite Difficult Quiz Book, which contains, I hope, many, many Doctor Who related rounds, including Doctor Who villain or musical instrument. I'm sure you can guess the crossover there. Thank you, Toby. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest, this time around is David Quantick, who can be found on Twitter @Quantick, and his book is out on November the 2nd. These podcasts are only possible thanks to the generosity of patrons, who include John Turner, Gary Wales, Alistair Wallace, Gavin Ware, Peter Ware, Rich Wiggins, Sydney Wilson, Ruben Herfindahl, Peter Burns, Peter Harness, Rob Leonard, Stephen Moffat, Richard Straw, John Curley, Mark Dakin, John Elledge, Gary Gillett, James Gould, Lisa C. Greco, Dave Hoskins, Jessica Jones, Andrew Jordan, Ashley Knight, Clive Lewis, Guy Lambert, James Lark, Gavin McLean, Nathan Martin, David Matthewman, John McClay, and Hugh Davies. The music is by Dave Gates, and the artwork by Dylan Patterson. Would you like to be a patron? Well, if you would, you can go to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. It costs as little as £3 a month. And for that, well, you could have been listening to this months ago. Oh, there was still petrol and fish when this podcast was first released. And you also get bonus material that's exclusive to patrons, including a whole podcast called Far Too Much Information, where you can find out all sorts of information you didn't even know you needed to find out, and you might not be sure you needed to find out afterwards, but it's got good music, and I do my best to keep it light and fun. And if you cannot do the monthly subscription, I totally understand that. But if you're passing by ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke, you can throw me some pennies to buy a metaphorical coffee, should you ever particularly have enjoyed something that I've done, or just feel sorry for me. Those things are equally possible. I also know it's not possible for everybody to contribute financially, and I'm just mostly grateful that you listen and that there's an audience out there. But it's Doctor Who. There's always more of an audience, and there's so much to choose from. It really helps and costs you nothing if you give this a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts from, and perhaps leave some nice words of appreciation that will help this to stand out amongst all of the other Doctor Who podcasts, and perhaps point people in its direction who might not yet have availed themselves of the opportunity. If you could do that, I'd be very, very grateful, and where I'm sitting now would be a happier time and place. I'm on Twitter @Toby Hadoke. These podcasts have their own feed @Hadoke Podcasts, and I also am a stand-up comedian and do a live comedy show in Manchester every Tuesday at Excess Malarkey, which is the Breadshed, Manchester, 8 p.m. And we have a online version of that show the first Sunday of every month on twitch.tv/Excess Malarkey. There's an archive of past shows and past guests up there right now, and it's absolutely free. We do encourage donations, but it's free at the point of entry, so give it a whirl if you fancy brightening your day. Literally, as I recorded that, my copy of Evil of the Daleks popped through the letterbox. So now we can begin the final end. So, see ya.